Today, we're going to take a closer look at this pilot style watch from Citizen. It is part of their Weekender Avion collection. This Flieger style watch harkens back to the time when pilots wore watches strapped to the outside of their leather flight jacket. They were large and utilitarian in nature. They also had a Type B dial where the minute numbers were large and the hour numbers were small. This is the Citizen model number AW1361-10H. This watch is currently available at the Amazon USA site for $151, or head on over to Joma Shop and pick it up for $139. Hey everyone, welcome back to Eric's Everyday Watches. As always, if you like this video, if you find it helpful, please do me a favor, hit the like button and consider subscribing. It comes in the standard Citizen packaging, and I've said this numerous times, I do like this packaging. You know, it has a black box with a white plastic rigid top with the Citizen logo on it. The black part itself has a faux wood pattern to it, and if we spin the box around, we see there are hinges to it. Opening up the box, we do find the watch is presented on a nice thick black watch pillow. The case of the watch is stainless steel, with the diameter coming in at 45 millimeters, not including the crown. For a lug-to-lug distance, we have 50 millimeters, and there is a nice downturn to the lugs, which means it does sit pretty well on your wrist. That said, this watch by design is meant to have a lot of wrist presence. The watch has a dual finish to it, with a majority being a brushed finish. The chamfered edge on the side of the case where it meets the top is given a polished finish, as well as the chamfered edge just underneath the glass when viewing it from the sides. The brushing on the side of the case is done in a vertical direction and definitely offers some contrast between the rest of the case. On first glance, it does not appear to be overly refined. However, given the historically utilitarian nature of this type of watch, I think it's kind of fitting. The high polished areas definitely help to balance out the overall feeling of the watch and make the brushed areas feel less of an afterthought and more of an intentional design choice. The fit and finish of this watch is what I would describe as fine. It is not great, it is not terrible, but there are no sharp corners on this case. The edges on the bottom are slightly sharper than on the top, but that's also because the edges on the top have a chamfered edge on them. The only area that does seem questionable is the inside of the lugs. In my opinion, those actually cross the line between being historically utilitarian and just too sharp. But given the fact that it's in between the lugs, it is unlikely to be noticed by the majority of people. Plus, at a price point of around $150, it is easily forgivable. On back of the case, we find a screw-down case back with text that reads Citizen Watch Company, 10 bar, water resistant, Eco Drive, Japan Movement, and J810. And inside that case, we have Citizen's Eco Drive J810 movement. And that movement does have a second hand that hacks and is rated at plus or minus 15 seconds a month. It also comes with an 8-month power reserve and a low charge indicator. It does have a date feature, but it does not have a day feature. The crown at the 3 o'clock position is 8 millimeters in width and 5 millimeters in depth, which might seem gigantic if you're not used to this style of watch. Originally, back in the 1930s or 40s, the crown on this type of watch was intentionally kept large for those times when you were preoccupied with little things like trying to keep a plane in the air. Obviously, this is a push-pull crown. No screw-down crown here. The first position adjusts the date, and pulling it out to the second position adjusts the time. Now, initially, I had some concerns about whether or not this size of crown might dig into my wrist, but during my everyday use, this was not the case. The date is printed white on black and is a bit unusual in the sense that it is large enough to show the date before and after as well as the current date. A small white arrow nicely leads your eye to the center of the current date. This does help in legibility, but I would have liked to seen the date done in a bolder font. In my everyday use, I found it easy to read in bright sunlight, but not so much in a dim environment. Now let's talk about the dial. Starting with the outer area, we have a tan printed minute track with thicker white indicators at the 12, 3, 6, and 9 positions. Now at first glance, you might think that these compass points were loomed, but sadly they are simply printed on. Inside of that, we have a step down, which I estimate to be 2 millimeters in height, adding a little depth and interest to the overall dial. Inside of that, we have a white printed triangle, which again, you might assume was loomed, but it is merely printed on. Now this is a type B dial. The Arabic numbers indicating the minutes are larger than the hour numbers. Here we have them printed in tan color again, appearing at the 5-minute increments. Inside of that, there is another smaller step down of approximately half of 1 millimeter. Here there are two more sets of Arabic numbers. The standard hour numbers appearing in orange and the military numbers 13 through 24 appearing in a tan color. In my opinion, the military numbers could have been left off the dial and the extra room have been given to make the remaining numbers larger. This would have aided in legibility, and the fact is, when the hour hand passes over the military numbers, it completely obscures them anyhow. Inside of all the numbers, at the 12 o'clock position, we have the Citizen logo printed directly on the dial. And further down below the center posts, we find the words EcoDrive. Now there are no applied indices anywhere on this dial. Everything is simply printed on. Fortunately, that step-down element Citizen added does provide at least a small amount of depth to the dial. The blue loom on the dial is solely on the minute and hour hands, which feels a little sparse. Adding loom to the 4 compass point seems like it would have been an easy and cost-effective way to help elevate the overall feeling of the watch. The sword style hour hand is outlined in orange and it is much wider than a minute hand, which is outlined in black. Now this is an interesting, if not odd, choice, given the fact that the numbers on the dial favor the minutes and not the hours. Both hands, however, have a high amount of contrast against the dark gray dial, making for easy legibility. The second hand is black, with the end being painted orange. It could have been 1 to 2 millimeters longer to meet up with the minute track, and it's a shame that it's not, because it does hit those markers dead on the entire way around the dial. I wish the orange painted area on the second hand extended a bit further to meet up with the white circle found in between the hour numbers and the military time. But sadly, it does not. And this seems to be a bit of a miss on the part of Citizen. In my everyday use, I found the thinness of the second hand along with the orange color used to be difficult to read at a glance. It just doesn't offer enough contrast against the dial. My initial concern with this style of watch is whether or not the Type B dial would be more difficult to read at a glance. But if anything, I found it easier to tell the time down to the exact minute quicker. The dark gray dial is a simple, flat color, unembellished, as you would expect on this type of watch. It is a warm enough tone that it pairs well with the tan and orange colors, making for a pleasant looking dial. And topping off that dial, we have a piece of mineral crystal. The leather strap that comes with this watch is a caramel brown color and is 22 millimeters wide at the lugs and 5 millimeters thick. It tapers down to 19.5 millimeters wide and 4 millimeters thick at the last adjustment hole. There is white contrasting stitching running the length of the strap. The sides of the strap have been blackened out, and it does feel like a quality strap when holding it in your hands. There's a slight cushioning feel when pushing down on the strap in between your fingers. Now, my initial use of the strap, I did find it to be a bit stiff, but I've had the same strap come on other Citizen watches, and I know from experience that it does break in nicely. So let's go over the specs for this watch. We have a Minocrystal Citizens J810 EcoDrive movement, a diameter of 45 millimeters, a thickness of 12.5 millimeters, a lug width of 22 millimeters, and finally a lug-to-lug distance of 50 millimeters. And finally, let's wrap up by going over the pros and cons. For pros, you do get the Type B dial, which is rather unique looking. It is legible when it comes to telling the time. You have 100 meters water resistance, the EcoDrive movement, and it is an attractive color scheme. For cons, there's just not enough lume incorporated onto the dial. The second hand can be difficult to read. The military numbers seem unnecessary and are actually covered up by the hour hand, and the inside of the lugs is a little sharp. So my final thoughts on this watch. You know, it's not without some cons, but everything in context. For a watch that is around $150, it is affordably priced. There's a solid movement inside, and the dial is rather unique looking. I would say if you like the Type B dial, it is worth the money. This has been Eric from Eric's Everyday Watches, reminding you to buy the watch that you love and don't pay any attention to what anybody else says or thinks. This is your watch collection. If you like this video, if you find it helpful in any way, please do me a favor, hit the like button and consider subscribing. I'll see you in the next video.